the hero's journey, the archetypal adventure that lies at the cross-section of humanity's mythical stories and our shared unconscious psychology. From the Mesopotamian myth of Queen Inanna and the adventures of King Gilgamesh, to the Greek stories of Prometheus and the tales of Odysseus. From the sacred scriptures of Moses to those of Prince Arjuna and the Buddha. All these stories from throughout history display a typical sequence of hero actions that the American scholar Joseph Campbell laid out in his seminal work, The Hero with 1,000 Faces. Campbell describes this monomyth as a cycle of the following events. A hero ventures forth from the world of common day into a region of supernatural wonder. Fabulous forces are there encountered, and a decisive victory is won. The hero comes back from this mysterious adventure with the power to bestow boons on his fellow man. The basic motif of the hero's journey is that the hero leaves in one condition, finds the source of life, and then returns in a richer, more mature condition. According to Campbell, the most heroic of all acts is the courage to discover who you are and what you would like to be, to slay the savage dragon of the ego, and to follow your bliss to the truth of your life. This motif is so fundamental to the human psyche that it continues to be a common archetype for contemporary storytelling, exemplified in such movies as Star Wars, Harry Potter, and Disney's Moana. More recently, the hero's journey can be seen in its full glory in the narrative arc of the sitcom documentary mExpats. Let us examine this fabled miniseries against some of the 17 common heroic events that Campbell identifies. At the beginning, our protagonist, Joshua Cohen, is content in his ordinary world on the campus of Brown University. However, his post-college plans have fallen through, and he feels an obligation to his parents to go out and find work. The year is 1992, and the job market in the United States is not good. So he looks abroad, finding the American Chamber of Commerce. This is his call to adventure. The next step, the refusal of the call, comes as there is some confusion as to whether there are any jobs available, and our hero is confronted by friends who believe that free trade with Mexico is not in the best interest of the United States. However, Dr. Deborah Reiner provides a bit of supernatural aid, luring Josh to cross the threshold with a flight to Mexico. Upon his arrival, Josh receives the help of a mentor, Joel Russell, the editor of Business Mexico, who provides our hero with information on how to proceed in this new supernatural world of corporate finance and economics. Josh is also aided by an array of other young expats who are similarly in over their heads in this exciting foreign land. Our hero faces a series of trials and tribulations, which include being chased out of his apartment by a madman and then being overwhelmed by work when most of the economics department quits or is fired, leaving Josh alone to author 3 books, all while the country is entering an economic crisis of monumental proportions. Though lured by temptations of being so close to the centers of Mexican economic and political power, Josh comes to realize that there is more to life than following what society deems is the path of a respectable career. Nonetheless, in joining a funk rock band, our hero is derailed from his long-term journey as he is seduced by the goddess of fame, appearing on Mexican television several times and then opening for the internationally acclaimed band Maná. Josh enters the innermost cave, the offices of Warner Brothers Mexico, where he faces his deepest fears, the failure to make creativity his life's vocation, as his band is rejected by the powers of the music industry. Our hero undergoes a transformation as he realizes that he can't rely on some external power for validation. He gains the confidence to see that the promise of NAFTA will not come to pass, and that he must break free from the corporate world and take control of his own destiny. Josh must then undertake what Joseph Campbell refers to as the atonement with the Father, facing the fearsome father god that is his boss, John Bruton, so as to renounce his position at the chamber and in the process allow his higher self to come to life. Our hero then experiences what Campbell calls the refusal of the return, accepting a job interview with Goldman Sachs in New York, flirting with a continuance of life in the financial world. Fortunately, Josh undergoes what Campbell refers to as rescue from without, when his childhood friend Gabe Gilligan helps Josh to reorient his priorities and undertake his journey home. It is at this point that Josh and Gabe head to the border in the 1973 Dodge Dart, crossing the return threshold, so that our hero may return to the ordinary world with the elixir that he will share with the rest of mankind. Josh will become the master of two worlds and attain the freedom to live in a state of true enlightenment.
I know what you're thinking. You've got nearly 4.5 hours invested in this sitcom documentary, and you are anxious for me to share some of my enlightenment with you. Okay, I'm ready to lay it on. When I first returned to my folks' place in Wappingers Falls, on the surface it seemed like nothing much had changed. My brother was in town fixing his car with my dad, which is probably how I left the two of them 5 years prior. Mom was as even-keeled and supportive as ever, though my sister Wendy and her boyfriend Joe appeared to be moving in slow motion. One might conclude that they were high on some foreign substance, but the truth was that they were simply intoxicated with the tranquility of life in the country. However, beyond this veneer of Dutchess County perfection, things were not the same. During my time away, my mom's mom, Grandma Min, had developed Alzheimer's. The only footage I have of Min is this Super 8 film my sister took when we visited her while I was still in high school. Having very rarely gone home during my time in Mexico, I was really shaken by how much older everyone looked when I finally did return. It was the first time that I truly appreciated the passage of time. Usually young people don't think about such things, so perhaps this new clairvoyance was part of the elixir I had returned with. I had moved beyond my own hero's journey and was now ready to hear the stories of all the heroes I knew in my life. Sadly, my grandma barely recognized me as a family member, and I just didn't know how to handle it. Fortunately, my dad's parents still had all of their mental faculties and were living independently in a condo in Margate, Florida. Being acutely aware that time was not on my side, in the summer of 1997, shortly after returning from Mexico, I headed down to capture their life stories on videotape. My grandfather, known to us as Pops, ran one of the very first stores to get a liquor license in New York following the end of Prohibition. According to Pops, his store in Harlem was the veritable center of political power in the city from the 1930s through the 1970s, where both mobsters and police officers alike conducted business and sought his counsel and support.
You couldn't get a traffic ticket in my precinct. You drove, even if you drove on the sidewalk, but if a cop stopped you, you couldn't get it. He wouldn't give you a ticket, as long as you mentioned my name. Yeah.
My grandma Dottie's story seemed even more otherworldly. She was brought up in a small village called Schmilovitz in what was Russia, and spoke of life under the rule of the Tsar. She also explained how Polish soldiers had taken control of the village during World War I, but that her mom was able to scare them away when they arrived at her door.
So my mother made my sister Gertie, the oldest, lie down in bed, and she painted her face with red marks, and she put a compress over her head, over her forehead, and she told my sister not to smile. My sister said, "What are you doing?" She says, "We're playing a game. We want to scare the soldier."
My drive to preserve all these stories led me to return to Schmilovitz in what is now Belarus and to find the last remaining Jewish family in the village. I brought back video so as to show my grandmother images of a place that she had not seen in more than 80 years. I was fascinated by the fact that the modern economy made such reverse heroes' journeys possible, but my grandmother was just confused as to why anyone in their right mind would want to return to what she considered to be such a miserable place. Fortunately, my dad was much more willing to return to his 1940s childhood. We went to his old neighborhood in the Bronx so as to capture some of his wholesome stories and preserve them for the benefit of future generations. This was some of the elixir I was offering up to humanity.
And you would take it back up onto your place, onto the roof, and then you would throw snowballs down, and especially the younger kids when they would come home. They would get bombarded with snowballs, and those are not exactly snow. They were more like ice balls.
All right.
So they were very dangerous. If you hit somebody,
Well, the marbles you would shoot were probably more dangerous.
The marbles were not as dangerous to people because the odds of hitting a person is minimal, but they damage cars.
I imagine.
So all these beatings you had when you were a child that you said was child abuse, I think maybe you might have deserved.
I didn't deserve any of it.
You might not have deserved it, but you were asking for it.
No, because these things I'm telling you about, they never knew about.
They didn't
All right, they beat me just for kicks.
When you look back at the footage of me seemingly praying at the mantle of Sam's Club in the hoarding episode of mExpats, you might be confused as to how I got there. After all, having been brought up in the political milieu of the Hudson River Sloop Clearwater Environmental Organization, it was not so clear that I was destined to become so obsessed with plastic-wrapped, mass-manufactured snack cakes. You would think that I'd lean more towards the amaranth-based treats called alegrias that have been handmade in the Xochimilco neighborhood of the city since pre-Hispanic times. However, having witnessed poverty and underdevelopment in Mexico, I came to see economic modernization as the path forward for the country. To me, every manufactured item, no matter how insipid, came to represent the expansion of the consumer class in Mexico, and thus the promise of greater economic possibilities in the future. I would periodically go to my local supermarket just to ogle the variety of products and soak in the modernity. Interest in seeing the country develop became one of my prime motivators. Sure, I have to admit that I'm not immune to a bit of personal vanity. The day I was profiled in Executive World magazine was certainly a thrill at the time. I ran out to the local Sanborn store to buy as many copies as possible so that I might one day store them in a box in my basement. Nonetheless, when I look back at all I had done while in the country, the event that gives me the most satisfaction was the time that Arturo Luján, the manager of marketing and strategic planning of the 3M Corporation, came to my office to thank me for the Chamber's work. As is memorialized in this memorandum, during the worst moments of the crisis, corporate executives from their U.S. headquarters wanted to let go of 25% of the Mexican workforce. Arturo was able to use my research on corporate strategies to convince them that this was way too drastic of a move. As a result, he was able to save the livelihoods of 150 workers and their families. My reaction to this news was extremely positive and represented the evolution of my economic thought over time. In my youth, Ronald Reagan was not exactly highly regarded in the circles I ran in, but here I was, embracing his vision for a unified and prosperous North America. Still, was this really going to be the totality of my economic wisdom upon returning from Mexico? After all, here I was giving up my life working for the man to start a rock band. As Gabe and I settled into life in Baltimore, Maryland, I needed an economic framework to understand the new world I was entering, and a way to explain it to others. This came to a head one day when I was speaking with my grandma Dottie. She asked me how I was doing, and I told her I was extremely happy. After a long pause, she responded, "You know, Josh, there's more to life than happiness." I knew folks were perplexed by my decision to give up corporate life, but this response absolutely floored me. Ultimately, it led me to compose a treatise entitled The New Economic Reality of the 21st Century, The Benefits of Early Retirement, Hoarding, and the Public Library System. This was to be my magnum opus, picturing a world in which most individuals spend the greater portion of their lives dedicated to leisure and other free time activities, intellectual pursuits, and the enjoyment of tasty foodstuffs. The piece essentially argued that the standard measure of economic prosperity, the gross domestic product, is fundamentally flawed, containing inherent assumptions about what people truly value, which in turn distorts our perceptions of economic reality, and leads to a sort of cult of consumerism, limiting our ability to achieve true prosperity. I know what you're thinking. This guy is either a prophet or another Unabomber. I gotta admit, it's some heavy-ass thinking that is not easily summarized in a sitcom documentary, but the upshot of it was that it would serve as the intellectual roadmap, which would allow me to bring my average work week down to under 6 hours in total. Unbeknownst to me at the time, I was attempting to forge a lifestyle that John Maynard Keynes had predicted in his essay, The Economic Possibilities of Our Grandchildren, written in 1930 about life 100 years in the future. Keynes had calculated that compound growth would lead to levels of wealth in the developed world that would be 4 to 8 times their current value, something which did essentially come to pass. Keynes argued that the result would be a new era of leisure and abundance, where people would work 15 hours a week. With the economic problem finally solved, individuals could pursue their true values in life. They would be faced with their real permanent problem, how to use their freedom, how to occupy their leisure to live wisely and agreeably and well. I know what you're thinking. Keynes sounds like he could be the Unabomber. I was determined to live by the precepts contained in my New Economic Reality treatise. First, I would need a new look that would be appropriate for my revolutionary thinking. I decided to go full-out colonial America, something that came natural to me as a child of historic Fishkill, New York. Next, I would seek out used and antiquated technologies that contained massive amounts of value add from prior years, but whose contribution to my prosperity was simply not counted as part of the current GDP. I decided to share this abundance with friends and family, throwing a history of video gaming party with 14 systems distributed throughout the apartment. There were technologies that had taken hundreds of millions of dollars to develop, but which Gabe and I were able to get for a pittance at local swap meets. The highlight of the evening was when my brother's engineer friends were able to resuscitate a previously non-functional Atari Pong unit. It appears we were all drunk on the elixir of economic enlightenment. The only thing left for me to do was to complete the mission that I had started but failed at in Mexico. It was time for me to take on the music industry. I put out a pamphlet entitled Common Musical Sense, which contended that music could not maintain its cultural relevance if subjected to the fetters of economic efficiency. All of my past focus on economics and rock and roll was finally coming together in a coherent project. The band Gabe and I formed was called Fight House, and we undertook a series of outlandish self-promotional blitzes, including a lobbying campaign to get our song Baltimore adopted as the city's official rock anthem. Although folks were confused as to who might be funding us, ultimately we got multiple high-level endorsements, including those of a deputy police commissioner, the CEO of the public schools, and even the lieutenant governor of Maryland. Mayor Martin O'Malley would only go on record as kind of liking the song, but it was a win nonetheless. As our final act, we dropped the bomb, composing an anti-record industry anthem and releasing it as an open-source song. Music execs didn't know it hit them. In the end, my whole life had become one big performance art project, and I lost track of where reality and absurdity began. Still, this was a statement that I needed to make about my beloved rock music, which somehow had become a dying genre while I was away in Mexico. Even though rock and roll and the economic crisis of 1994 took center stage of the footage I shot while in Mexico, what I was never able to capture on video was what it was like to acquire knowledge of the unspoken subtleties of my new cultural environment. The silent language, to use the terminology of the renowned anthropologist Edward T. Hall. Learning how to speak a foreign language is one thing, but attaining cultural understanding requires that the whole mind return to a state of childlike wonder and openness in order to pick up on the non-verbal and informal aspects of communication. Fortunately, my 20s-something mind was plastic enough, and over the course of time, both as a student and as a member of the workforce, my brain went through a transformation which altered how I perceived reality and in turn how I communicated. Of course, I retained many of my gringo beliefs and my Dutchess County idealism, which could lead to some cultural clashes now and again. Still, I came to a point where I could comfortably slip into both the subcultures of Mexican business affairs as well as those of the Mexico City rock underground. In the process, I came to gain a greater awareness of my own culture and began questioning some of the beliefs that I had previously assumed were self-evident truths. This was probably the greatest superpower I could return home with, as it leads to a better understanding of how perceptions of reality can vary across a multitude of subcultures that exist even within the United States. Moreover, as cultures change over time, we can't hope to understand the language of past eras without a good dose of storytelling. And inevitably, even those who have lived through the past can't help but recast events using the mental frameworks of their contemporary selves. When I eventually had children, I decided to bring them up bilingual, because why not? My son Noah was the first to be subjected to this experiment.
¿Qué está haciendo el tractor?
Haciendo cosas.
¿Qué cosas?
Como volteando basura y llevando el hay baler.
However, it was clear that as natural as this might appear to them, neither Noah nor my daughter Dagmar were ever going to think or communicate like a Mexican unless they had the good fortune of taking their own hero's journey down south someday. My kids were born Marylanders, and as much as I might try to take them on a bit of time travel with my home videos, they were never going to speak or think like a 1970s kid from Poughkeepsie. Likewise, as much as I have enjoyed returning to Mexico over the years, when I do, I also feel I'm returning to that part of my severed brain that is stuck in the culture and language of the 1990s. I can't believe it. I just went to Sam's Club and asked them if by chance my membership from 1997 was still active. They looked me up in the system and they said, no, it's not active anymore. They say it's only active for 1 year. I said, well, that's really unfortunate. It was 1994 when Mexico joined NAFTA. The country wanted to modernize, but just what will come after? Insurgent rebels took the South, the presidential candidate was killed. Investors pulled their money out and a crisis ensued. In came the mExpats, the Yanks with their backpacks, oh yeah, it was quite a thrill. Opportunity to make a buck or two. Perhaps they could help out, they thought they could, no doubt, oh yeah, wasn't it cool? And I was down there too, fresh out of school.